Daniel Carter sat alone in the half-light of his Manhattan apartment, the city hum outside his window a distant, indifferent murmur. His fingers hovered over his phone, unwilling and yet compelled to check it again. The message had arrived 10 minutes ago, a digital dagger that cut sharper than any argument ever could. I'll decide when we talk or spend time together. Stop chasing me. He stared at the words as if they were written in ice, the glow of the screen illuminating his furrowed brow. Daniel had read it 3 times already, each repetition digging a little deeper into the hollow pit of his chest. Olivia. His Olivia. His wife. The woman whose laughter used to echo through these rooms now sounded like a ghost in the memory of another life. He remembered the morning when he first met her, 5 years ago, at a charity gala in Soho. Olivia had worn a crimson dress that seemed to ignite the room, her smile confident, enigmatic. He had been captivated immediately, drawn not just to her beauty but to the ease with which she seemed to command attention without demanding it. She had a presence that made him feel alive, and for a while he believed their lives intertwined seamlessly. But tonight, the apartment felt impossibly empty, even with the city below them sparkling and alive. Daniel sank into the leather chair, the weight of the silence pressing down on him. The text lingered. More than a message, it was a verdict, a line in the sand he hadn't seen coming. Stop chasing me. The words carried the quiet authority of someone who had already made a decision, someone reclaiming agency he had assumed he still had over their shared life. Daniel's mind raced through the past weeks. He thought about the subtle signs he had ignored, the delayed replies, the evenings she spent alone in her studio, the way her gaze seemed to drift past him as though he were invisible. He had chalked it up to work stress, city fatigue, the normal ebb and flow of married life. Now, each overlooked sign seemed to him a prelude to this precise moment. He had been blind, and it cost him the illusion of control he had always believed marriage granted him. He remembered the arguments, quiet at first, small irritations that escalated into silences. The nights when he tried to hold her hand in bed, only for her to pull away, her body tense, her eyes distant. He recalled trying to coax her into conversations, to coax her into shared dinners or weekend plans. And now, reading the words she had sent, he realized she had been sending the same message all along, just in subtler ways. Daniel put the phone down and ran a hand over his face. The apartment smelled faintly of lavender, Olivia's signature scent. He could almost feel her presence lingering in the corners, a reminder of what he had cherished and, perhaps, what he had never truly understood. He tried to summon the warmth, the intimacy, but all that remained was a sense of estrangement, a chasm that had silently widened between them.
He thought about their friends, couples they often dined with in the Upper East Side, laughing over wine and sharing curated lives on social media. To outsiders, everything looked perfect. Their Instagram photos were glossy and flawless, the smiles wide and the evenings sparkling. But behind the lens, the smiles had grown tight, the conversations rehearsed. The city had always demanded appearances, and Daniel realized, perhaps too late, that he and Olivia had been performing for everyone but themselves. He recalled the last dinner they had shared, a Thursday night, sushi at a place she loved on the West Side. They had barely spoken, and when they did, the words felt like currency in a transaction neither could enjoy. Olivia had smiled politely, laughed at things he barely understood, and for the first time, Daniel noticed the subtle tremor in her fingers as she pushed her wine glass aside. He had attributed it to fatigue. Now he understood it as the first tremor of revolt, a quiet signal of her growing autonomy. The phone vibrated again, a new message. Daniel's heart lurched, expecting some clarification, some softening, some thread of connection. But it was only a heart emoji, sent hours later, sterile and distant. He felt a flash of anger, the desire to call her, to demand an explanation, to reclaim what he thought was his. Yet, even as the impulse rose, he recognized the futility. This was not a situation to be chased. not a heart to be corralled by persistence or pleading. Olivia had drawn her boundary, and Daniel was forced to acknowledge it. He leaned back and allowed himself to remember her laughter, the evenings spent reading side by side, the walks in Central Park where they had once imagined futures together. Those memories, bittersweet and precise, cut him more deeply than anger could. He realized the truth. Marriage, for all its vows and promises, could falter under the weight of unmet expectations, under the quiet erosion of personal space and autonomy. Olivia had reached a breaking point, and her declaration was not just a refusal, it was a reclamation of self. As the night deepened, Daniel sat in silence, the city lights flickering against the walls of his apartment like distant stars he could not reach. He tried to chart a course, to imagine a conversation that might bridge the gulf between them. But the harder he tried, the more he understood that this chapter of their lives required patience, reflection, and perhaps a willingness to let go of control. He opened a journal he had long abandoned, pen poised over blank pages. Maybe writing could anchor him, translate the storm in his chest into something tangible. He began to write her name over and over, Olivia, each stroke a meditation on what had been, what was, and what might never be again. Hours passed. The city outside pulsed with life, indifferent and unstoppable. Daniel's thoughts circled the same truths. Love could be suffocating if possession replaced understanding, and intimacy required more than proximity. It demanded respect, autonomy, and empathy. He understood with aching clarity that the chase was over. He could wait, he could listen, or he could learn to let go. For the first time that evening, he allowed himself a single, steady breath. The phone lay face down on the table, a silent reminder that some messages were not invitations, but declarations. And Daniel, for all his success and confidence, recognized the beginning of a new, humbling journey, one where he must navigate the delicate space between love and autonomy, between desire and respect. The message was short, the consequences infinitely long.
The mornings had changed. Daniel woke to the absence of Olivia's presence beside him, her side of the bed cool and untouched, the weight of her body no longer a familiar anchor. The apartment, once full of her subtle touches, an open book on the coffee table, the faint scent of lavender in the air, a half-empty cup of tea, now felt like a hollow space, echoing with what was no longer there. He moved through the apartment as if walking in someone else's life, aware of the silence she had imposed without even lifting a finger. Olivia's withdrawal was methodical, deliberate. She began spending evenings at her art studio, a loft in Tribeca that she claimed was necessary for her creativity. Daniel had tried to accompany her once, hoping to bridge the growing distance, but she declined politely, citing deadlines and inspiration. It wasn't anger in her voice, only an unshakable certainty. The refusal stung more than any quarrel. Daniel realized he had underestimated the quiet power of her autonomy. Their dinners together had become rare, perfunctory. When they did eat in the same room, conversation was reduced to logistics, groceries, appointments, bills. There was no laughter, no teasing banter, no warmth. Daniel watched Olivia across the table, her posture perfect, eyes focused on her phone or a glass of water, and he felt like an intruder in his own home. Each glance they exchanged was laden with unspoken tension, the kind that forms slowly, silently, until it becomes impossible to ignore. Work had always been Daniel's refuge, but now even the office felt different. He would sit at his sleek glass desk, eyes glazing over quarterly reports and emails, all the while thinking about the message and its implications. Stop chasing me. He tried to dissect the words, the punctuation, the rhythm, as if understanding the syntax could reveal her motives. But there was no hidden clue, no miscommunication to correct.
She had chosen distance, and he could not impose himself. He remembered the early days of their marriage, when disagreement meant debate and compromise. They had spent hours discussing books, politics, the trajectory of their careers. Back then, even the silences had been comfortable. A shared pause in a dialogue neither of them wanted to end. Now, silence was a chasm. Daniel felt its weight in the elevator, in the empty apartment hallways, in the vacant seat across from him at breakfast. The silence was not passive, it was active, a statement of power and boundary he had never imagined. Daniel attempted to bridge the gap. He left little notes on the counter. "Coffee is on, your favorite blend." He sent texts asking about her day, gently probing without pressure. Her replies were brief, courteous but distant, punctuated with the occasional emoji, a hand wave, a neutral face, a heart that felt perfunctory rather than affectionate. Each response was a reminder of the distance she had carved. He realized he was no longer speaking to his wife, but to a curated version of her, one that existed only in fragments she chose to share.
He watched her through the apartment door one evening as she prepared for a dinner she said was with friends. Her movements were precise, deliberate, her expression serene, unreadable. Daniel's pulse quickened, not with anticipation, but with a creeping sense of alienation. He loved this woman for her depth, her complexity, but now that same complexity felt like a wall. He longed to reach her, to grasp some part of her that was still tethered to him, yet he recognized the futility. She was reclaiming herself, step by measured step. At work, the creeping distance manifested in his own social interactions. Daniel found himself restless at meetings, distracted by thoughts of Olivia's absence. He imagined her laughing with friends, walking through the streets of Manhattan without him, existing in a world where he was not the center of her gravity. His control, his assumptions of marital certainty, were unraveling with a slow, relentless precision. He realized that the distance was not only physical, but emotional, a recalibration of boundaries that demanded he reconsider his own role. Daniel began keeping a journal again, something he had abandoned years ago. He wrote without direction, letting thoughts spill onto paper. The emptiness he felt, the fear, the longing, and the frustration. He recorded moments from the week. Olivia's absence at dinner, the text messages left unanswered, the quiet stirrings of jealousy and guilt. The act of writing was grounding, a tether to reality, a way to confront feelings too tangled for speech. In the stillness of ink on paper, he could articulate the unsaid, examine the fissures in their relationship, and confront the truth of his helplessness. One evening, he overheard her laughter through the open door of the studio. It was soft, fleeting, but unmistakable. He froze in the hallway, torn between relief and envy. The sound reminded him that she was alive, that the spark he had once adored was still there, just not for him. It was a revelation, as painful as it was necessary. Olivia's world had shifted, and he was now an observer, not a participant. He tried to speak to her one night, gently, hoping to bridge the gap. "Olivia, can we talk?" His voice was low, careful. She paused in the kitchen, placing a hand on the counter, her eyes meeting his for a fraction of a second. There was no anger, no accusation, only a quiet firmness. "Not now, Daniel. I'll decide when we talk. Please, stop chasing me." The words hit him differently this time. Before they were a shock. Now they were a lesson. He understood that love, in its most profound form, could not be demanded, coaxed, or imposed. It existed fully only when it was freely given. He had believed that proximity, attention, and persistence equaled devotion. Olivia was teaching him otherwise. Daniel sank onto the couch, exhausted and raw. He watched the skyline of Manhattan flicker with neon and streetlights, each window a story of lives intersecting, diverging, moving forward. He realized that he and Olivia were at a crossroads. Their marriage, once seamless and unquestioned, was now defined by choice, by agency, and by the courage to respect the distance she had set. For the first time in days, he let himself breathe, acknowledging the space between them. The silence no longer felt entirely hostile. It was a boundary, a protective barrier around a woman reclaiming herself. Daniel did not yet know if they would find their way back, but he understood that he could not force the journey. He had to wait, reflect, and perhaps learn the difficult art of letting go. And in the quiet, as the city buzzed indifferently beneath him, Daniel began to understand the gravity of Olivia's message. Love was not possession. Desire was not control. Sometimes the greatest act of devotion was patience, respect, and the willingness to honor another's choices, even when they hurt.
The city had a rhythm that Daniel had long thought he understood. The clatter of subways, the murmur of evening crowds, the distant sirens, all were familiar companions to his controlled, measured existence. But suddenly, the familiar cadence of Manhattan felt alien, distorted, as though the world itself had shifted in response to the widening distance between him and Olivia. He began noticing things he had never seen before. A shadowy reflection in a window, a message notification disappearing from her phone when he glanced too quickly. The faint scent of perfume, unfamiliar to him. It began subtly, as these things often do. A friend mentioned seeing Olivia at a gallery opening in Chelsea, her laughter echoing across a room he hadn't been invited to. She wore a sapphire dress that shimmered like the night itself, her hair cascading over one shoulder. She appeared radiant, free, almost untouchable. Daniel felt a pang of something he could not name. Envy, yes, but also admiration, awe, and a tremor of guilt. He had loved her for her independence once, yet now the very independence he had admired felt like a wedge between them. He tried to rationalize it. Perhaps she was reconnecting with old friends, nurturing her creativity. But intuition has a way of sharpening perception, and Daniel began noticing patterns, subtle absences, unexplained phone calls, cryptic social media posts that hinted at experiences he was never part of, late-night texts from unknown numbers, a lunch meeting that stretched into hours, whispered conversations that stopped when he entered the room. The invisible threads of her hidden life began to weave a tapestry he wasn't allowed to touch. One evening, he followed a vague clue, a message Olivia had inadvertently left open on her laptop while preparing for a dinner meeting. Daniel did not read the content, respecting her privacy and principle, but the mere fact that he had glimpsed her digital world was enough to disturb him. He felt as if he were standing at the edge of a cliff, staring into a chasm filled with unknowns. Each step toward understanding her was a step deeper into territory he was forbidden to claim. At work, the stress of home seeped into every meeting, every interaction. His assistant, noticing his distracted demeanor, asked if everything was all right. Daniel forced a tight smile, nodding, muttering something about deadlines and strategy. Inside, however, he replayed fragments of Olivia's life outside his knowledge, snippets of conversations, glimpses of laughter, the sense that she was cultivating a world in which he was a spectator, not a participant.
The realization was both painful and illuminating. He had always prided himself on understanding people, on reading rooms and intentions with almost surgical precision. Yet here was his wife, the person closest to him, existing in layers he could not penetrate. She had become a constellation of secrets, a galaxy he could observe but never navigate fully. And Daniel felt the double-edged sting of admiration and despair. One night, the tension reached a quiet crescendo. Olivia had gone to her studio again, leaving the apartment eerily silent. Daniel wandered through their home, pausing at the photographs lining the walls. Pictures of trips, celebrations, ordinary days that now seemed distant and alien. He touched a frame, Olivia laughing at the top of a mountain in Switzerland, her eyes shining with joy. Daniel's chest tightened. He realized that joy could exist without him, that life could unfold around her in dimensions he could neither control nor predict. In a rare moment of courage, he decided to confront her, not with anger, but with inquiry, with openness. He found her studio door slightly ajar, the warm glow of lamplight spilling into the hallway. He entered cautiously, aware of the stillness, the hum of creative energy that permeated the room. Olivia was at her easel, painting with a focus that made her seem almost otherworldly. The air smelled of oil and canvas, a sensory reminder of her autonomy. "Olivia," he began softly, careful not to startle her. She turned, eyes meeting his, calm but alert. He saw no defensiveness, no reproach, only clarity. "I've noticed things," he said, choosing words with care. "Things I don't understand. Places you go, people you meet. I just want to know because I feel left out." Olivia set down her brush, wiping her hands on a rag. Her gaze softened, but her posture remained firm. "Daniel, there are parts of my life that are mine alone. It doesn't mean I don't care about us. It means I need space to be myself, to explore, to breathe. You can't follow every step, every decision. You need to trust. Or this," she gestured between them, "will break entirely." Her words were measured, precise, yet they cut through him with their honesty. Daniel felt the weight of his own insecurities pressing against her calm certainty. He had always believed proximity equaled intimacy, presence equaled understanding. But here was a woman who lived in layers he had never entered, whose inner world he could not map, whose freedom was non-negotiable. He nodded slowly, absorbing the lesson. To love Olivia meant to respect her hidden life, to accept that autonomy was not betrayal, that distance did not always imply abandonment. He would have to navigate a delicate path between connection and intrusion, between desire and respect. As he left the studio, the city stretched out before him, neon lights reflecting in puddles from a recent rain. Daniel felt a mixture of longing and resolve. Olivia's hidden life was not a threat, it was a reality he had to reconcile with. And in that realization, he found the first stirrings of understanding, that love could coexist with distance, and that trust was not the absence of secrets, but the acceptance of them. That night, he returned to their apartment, quieter, more reflective. The emptiness no longer felt quite as alien. It was a space for contemplation, a place to confront his own fears, and to consider the woman he had married not as a possession, but as a complex, autonomous individual. For the first time, Daniel began to feel that maybe, just maybe, he could bridge the gap not by chasing her, but by learning to navigate the hidden depths she had carved for herself.
The weeks that followed were a delicate dance of distance and longing. Manhattan's skyline glimmered outside their apartment windows, indifferent to the tensions unfolding inside. Daniel carried the weight of Olivia's words everywhere, a constant hum in his chest. "I'll decide when we talk or spend time together." The message had reshaped the very rhythm of his days, transforming routine gestures into calculated pauses, measured breaths, and endless reconsiderations. Temptation, subtle and insistent, began creeping into their lives. Daniel noticed the attentions of colleagues at work, emails lingering longer than necessary, invites to dinners that felt personal rather than professional. For the first time, he felt the sting of jealousy, a twist in his chest at the idea of another man occupying the space he once assumed was exclusively his. At the same time, the possibility of connection with someone new flickered in the back of his mind, dangerous and unwelcome. It was a betrayal he didn't want, but could not entirely dismiss, a reflection of the fractured state of his heart. Olivia, too, was navigating the terrain of temptation. She met friends for cocktails in dimly lit bars, shared laughter with men who seemed to understand the facets of her personality Daniel had never truly known. She did not speak of romance, at least not directly, but there was a freedom in her eyes, a curiosity and exhilaration that reminded Daniel of the woman he had fallen in love with. He tried not to imagine what conversations unfolded in those moments, but the mind has a habit of wandering into forbidden territory, and his imagination became a theater of anxiety and longing. One evening, after a particularly tense week at work, Daniel returned to the apartment to find Olivia waiting. The air between them was charged with a quiet electricity, a mixture of anticipation and caution. She had prepared a simple dinner, the aroma of roasted vegetables and herbs filling the kitchen. Daniel noticed the subtle elegance of her presence, the way her hair caught the light, the gentle curve of her shoulders, the calm precision in her movements. He sat across from her, the silence stretching long enough to feel almost intimate. "You've been busy," he said, carefully neutral. Olivia looked at him, a shadow of amusement and weariness in her eyes. "I have, and so have you. But I think it's time we stopped pretending we can avoid the truth." Daniel's stomach nodded. He had sensed this moment approaching, a confession he was both eager and terrified to hear. "What truth?" he asked, softly, bracing himself for revelations that might shatter the fragile equilibrium between them. She set down her glass of wine, hands resting calmly on the table. "Daniel, I felt trapped, restricted, like I was losing myself in a life that was designed for us as a unit, but not for me as an individual. I needed to reclaim that. My time, my choices, my voice. And in doing so, I've explored possibilities. Conversations, connections. Nothing physical, nothing permanent. But the temptation, it's been there. And I think it's important you know because honesty is the only way we can move forward."
Daniel exhaled slowly, a mixture of relief and tension pressing against his chest. The confession was not a betrayal in the way he had feared, yet it carried weight enough to make him question everything he thought he knew about their marriage. He searched her eyes, looking for signs of guilt, of deceit, but found only clarity and vulnerability. Olivia was laying herself bare, not to absolve herself, but to demand understanding, to demand that he confront the fragility of their shared life. I appreciate your honesty," he said, his voice measured but tinged with emotion. "It's not easy to hear, but I would rather know than live in a world of uncertainty." Olivia nodded, a faint smile brushing her lips. "And I need to know that you can handle this, that you can respect my need for independence without it destroying what we have. I want us to find a way, Daniel, but it has to be real, grounded in truth, even when it's uncomfortable." They ate in silence for a while, the act of sharing a meal feeling both ordinary and momentous. Every bite, every glance seemed to carry unspoken acknowledgement of the delicate balance they were attempting to strike. Daniel felt the stirrings of empathy and understanding, the recognition that marriage was not simply a collection of shared routines, but a negotiation of desires, fears, and autonomy. Later, as they sat in the living room with the city lights casting long shadows, Daniel spoke again. "I've felt inadequate," he confessed. "Like I was missing something, failing to see the parts of you that needed freedom, parts I thought I understood, but clearly didn't." Olivia reached for his hand, the contact brief but grounding. "It's not about failure, Daniel. It's about growth. We've both changed. And love? Love isn't just about possession or proximity. It's about recognition of each other's needs, even when they conflict with our own desires." The conversation lingered long into the night, an unhurried exploration of boundaries and vulnerabilities. Daniel admitted to the temptation he had felt with others, a truth that came with shame and hesitation. Olivia shared her moments of curiosity, the fleeting considerations of alternative lives and experiences. Together, they navigated these admissions without recrimination, an exercise in understanding and empathy that neither had anticipated. By the end of the night, Daniel realized that temptation was not merely a threat. It was a mirror reflecting their insecurities, desires, and unmet needs. Confession, he understood, was not weakness, but courage, a willingness to confront the uncomfortable and reshape the contours of their relationship. In the soft glow of the apartment, amidst shadows and faint laughter from distant streets, he felt a renewed connection to Olivia, not the woman who had existed as his possession, but as a complex, autonomous individual whose choices could challenge and enrich him in equal measure. As they prepared for bed, the city's hum a gentle undertone, Daniel felt the first stirrings of acceptance. He could not control her temptations, nor could he expect her to relinquish her autonomy for his comfort. But he could meet her honesty with his own, navigate the silent spaces between them with patience, and learn to cherish the depth of a love that required courage and vulnerability. And in that understanding, Daniel knew that the journey ahead would not be easy. It would demand resilience, empathy, and a willingness to confront truths that were both liberating and painful. But for the first time in weeks, he felt a flicker of hope that their marriage could evolve, not by erasing temptation, but by embracing honesty, respect, and the delicate art of coexistence. The air in their apartment felt heavier that evening, charged with a tension neither Daniel nor Olivia could ignore. Manhattan's skyline glowed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, a sprawling city of indifferent lives continuing outside their intimate storm. Daniel had spent hours pacing, rehearsing words he wasn't sure he wanted to say, preparing for a confrontation he had feared yet knew was inevitable. Olivia was already seated at the dining table when he arrived, her posture upright, her hands folded in front of her, the calm precision of her body a contrast to the turmoil in his chest. Her eyes, usually soft and playful, held a quiet steel, the kind that belonged to someone fully aware of their boundaries. He could see the weight of unspoken truths reflected there, the careful control she had exercised over her emotions and actions for the past weeks. "Daniel," she said, voice measured, "we need to talk. I think we both know this can't go on like this." He took a deep breath. The words caught in his throat, and finally seated himself across from her. "I know," he admitted, trying to steady his voice. "I can feel the distance between us every day, and I can't pretend it isn't there anymore. I need to understand what's happening with us." Olivia nodded, leaning back slightly in her chair. "I've tried to show you, to signal it in ways you might notice, but maybe I wasn't clear enough. Maybe I was too polite, too careful. The truth is, I felt suffocated, like my life has become less about me and more about what's expected of me in this marriage, in the city, in the world we've built together." Daniel's chest tightened. The words were familiar. They echoed fragments of confessions she had shared earlier. But now, spoken aloud in the charged atmosphere of their living room, they carried a weight he could no longer ignore. "I didn't realize," he said quietly. "I thought I was supporting you, giving you space, but I can see now I misread so many things." She looked at him, eyes glistening with a vulnerability he had not allowed himself to notice in weeks. "And I didn't make it easy for you. I hid parts of myself, made choices I didn't fully explain, explored things, people that perhaps I shouldn't have. But it wasn't about betraying you. It was about reclaiming parts of me I thought were lost." Daniel swallowed hard, the raw honesty slicing through him like cold wind. He remembered the moments he had doubted her, late-night calls, unexplained absences, whispers of curiosity that made his chest ache. Now, facing her, he realized the complexity of her actions. They were not betrayals of love,
but cries for autonomy, for recognition of a self that had been quietly stifled in the routines of daily life and societal expectation. Do you do you regret telling me? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Olivia shook her head. No, I needed you to know. I can't fix what's broken if we don't face it. And I can't hide from you either. Not anymore. But I also need you to understand that reclaiming myself doesn't mean I don't love you. It means I need to love myself too. The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Daniel's mind raced, memories flashing. Arguments over trivial matters, laughter turned to silence, intimacy that had cooled without explanation. He now saw that their marriage had been a landscape of misaligned expectations, a delicate balance of desire, control, and independence. And tonight, all of it was laid bare, unfiltered, undeniable. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, and allowed himself to be vulnerable. I felt angry, jealous, hurt. And sometimes I wanted to push you, to chase the woman I thought I knew, to bring her back to me. But I see now that chasing doesn't bring closeness. It only deepens distance. I've been selfish, trying to control what I cannot, instead of understanding what you need.
Olivia reached across the table, her fingers brushing his in a tentative, grounding gesture. We've both been selfish, she admitted, and we've both hurt each other in ways we didn't intend. But it's time to stop pretending that silence or avoidance will heal anything. We need to face the emotions, the temptations, the disappointments, everything. Their conversation stretched on, an emotional marathon that dredged the depths of their shared and individual experiences. They confronted not just the distance and autonomy that had driven a wedge between them, but the underlying insecurities, fears, and unspoken resentments. Daniel admitted the subtle temptations he had felt with others, the fleeting thoughts of escape from a world that seemed increasingly complicated. Olivia, in turn, spoke of the moments she had questioned the marriage, of the curiosity that had led her to seek connection outside their home, not for love, but for validation, for the thrill of rediscovering herself. Tears came unbidden, and yet they were not solely tears of grief. They were tears of recognition, of raw honesty, and of the courage to face the discomfort of emotional truth. Daniel could feel the weight of years of assumption and expectation peeling away, leaving a space of fragile clarity. Olivia's gaze softened as she watched him struggle with his own admissions, and in that moment, the silence that had once been suffocating became a bridge, a tenuous, delicate connection forged through vulnerability and understanding. I don't know what happens next, Daniel confessed, voice trembling. But I know that I want to try. I want to meet you there in that space you need and see if we can rebuild, not what we had, but what we need. Olivia nodded slowly, the hint of a smile touching her lips. It won't be easy, and it won't happen overnight, but honesty is the first step. And maybe, just maybe, we can find a way forward together without losing ourselves or each other. For the first time in weeks, Daniel felt a sense of cautious hope. The confrontation had been painful, raw, and exhausting, yet it had also been liberating. They had laid bare their fears and desires, acknowledging the fractures and vulnerabilities that had been festering beneath the surface. And in doing so, they had created a space for understanding, a space where love could coexist with autonomy, where trust could grow in the absence of control, and where desire could be tempered by respect. As the night deepened, they sat side by side on the couch, the city lights flickering through the windows like distant constellations. Words were no longer necessary. The simple act of presence, of being together without pressure or expectation, carried its own intimacy. Daniel felt the tension in his chest ease, replaced with a fragile but undeniable connection. He understood, finally, that confrontation was not about winning or proving a point. It was about facing the uncomfortable truths, navigating the temptations and insecurities that life inevitably brings, and choosing to engage with one another authentically. And though the journey ahead was uncertain, Daniel knew they had taken the essential first step, confronting their emotional reality with honesty, courage, and a willingness to see each other fully. Tonight, the distance had been acknowledged. The temptation had been confessed. And in that acknowledgement, Daniel glimpsed the possibility of a love that could survive, not unscathed, but resilient and profound.
The weekend brought a rare kind of silence to the apartment, the kind that allowed reflection to seep in uninvited. Daniel sat alone in the living room, the soft hum of the city below acting as a distant, steady heartbeat. Olivia was at her studio, immersed in a canvas, her focus absolute. The apartment, usually a shared space of tension and quiet battles, had become a theater of thought, a mirror in which Daniel confronted himself. He stared at the photograph on the mantel, Olivia, laughing, caught mid-gesture in a sunlit street of Paris from a trip they had taken years ago. The memory was vivid, the scent of fresh bread from a nearby bakery, the sound of children playing, the warmth of her hand in his. That day had felt effortless, uncomplicated, a time when love seemed both expansive and certain. Now, as he traced the contours of her face in the photograph, Daniel realized that certainty had been an illusion, a comfort he had mistaken for understanding. The confrontation from the previous evening lingered in his mind, its words echoing with increasing clarity. Honesty is the first step. We can find a way forward together without losing ourselves or each other. He replayed the admissions they had shared, her temptations, his jealous imaginings, the moments when desire and autonomy collided, and began to see them not as threats, but as markers of a relationship evolving under pressure. Daniel reflected on his own failings, the ways he had conflated presence with intimacy, attention with control. He had pursued Olivia's attention with a mixture of love and fear, misunderstanding her need for autonomy as rejection. The more he chased, the more he had pushed her away, and yet the lesson was now clear. Love could not be imposed. It could only be nurtured, respected, and honored in its fullness, even when that meant stepping back. He thought of the temptation he had felt in her absence, the flickers of curiosity about what life might look like beyond the confines of their shared apartment. Those impulses had left him with a bitter taste of guilt, a reminder that desire is a double-edged force, capable of both igniting connection and undermining it. He realized that temptation was not inherently a betrayal, it was a mirror, revealing insecurities, unmet needs, and the gaps that exist even in deep, committed relationships. As he reflected, Daniel recognized the subtle ways Olivia had been asking for partnership in a new form, one that required empathy, patience, and humility. She had not abandoned him, she had claimed space for herself, a space he had mistakenly equated with distance. Her hidden life, her choices, her deliberate autonomy were not acts of defiance, but expressions of identity. And in acknowledging that, Daniel felt a shift in his perception, a softening of the edges of his fear, a willingness to engage with reality rather than clinging to an illusion. He considered the societal expectations they both carried, the unspoken scripts of marriage, success, and partnership that weighed on their every action. Olivia's insistence on defining her own boundaries was a rebellion against those scripts, a reminder that life is not lived in accordance with expectations, but through choices, however painful or challenging. Daniel had been complicit in enforcing those scripts through his assumptions, his silent judgments, and his need for control. Recognition of this complicity was uncomfortable, but necessary. Hours passed, the city below pulsing with distant sirens and headlights, while Daniel traced a path through his memories. He recalled moments of intimacy, arguments, reconciliations, and silences, each a thread in the intricate tapestry of their marriage.
He began to see patterns, the ways their lives had intertwined yet allowed space for friction and growth. The realization struck him. Love was not a static state, but a dynamic process, requiring negotiation, vulnerability, and constant recalibration.
When Olivia returned that evening, Daniel was still in the living room, notebook in hand, recording reflections he hadn't dared to speak aloud. She paused at the doorway, observing him with a mixture of curiosity and care. "You've been quiet today," she said softly, the sound of her voice bridging the distance that had lingered between them. "I've been thinking," Daniel admitted, "about us, about everything, about how I've misunderstood the space you need and how I've measured love by what I could control rather than what we share. I think I'm beginning to understand that freedom and closeness aren't opposites, they're parts of the same whole." Olivia's expression softened, a flicker of relief passing over her face. She moved to sit beside him, the proximity no longer fraught with tension, but a quiet acknowledgement of shared understanding. "It's not easy," she said, her hand brushing against his. "It requires trust and courage and the willingness to face the parts of ourselves we usually avoid." Daniel nodded, absorbing the depth of her words. He realized that reflection was more than just thinking. It was confronting truth, owning his fears, and acknowledging the consequences of past choices. He had been so focused on the external expressions of distance, messages, absences, subtle gestures, that he had neglected the internal terrain, the emotional topography that defined both him and Olivia. In that moment, he felt a profound recognition. Marriage was not a static possession, nor a guarantee of constant presence. It was a negotiation of hearts and minds, a landscape in which trust, autonomy, and honesty intersected. He understood that the message Olivia had sent, the one that had upended his assumptions, was not a command to surrender, but an invitation to engage, to observe, and to respect. "I want to learn," he said quietly. "I want to understand how to love you and myself in ways that allow both of us to exist fully, not by chasing, not by controlling, but by being present and by being honest." Olivia's gaze met his, steady and unwavering. "Then we begin," she said. "One day, one choice, one conversation at a time. There are no guarantees, Daniel, but there is possibility, and that is enough." They sat together in the fading light, the city around them a blur of movement and indifference. Silence fell, but it was no longer heavy. It was reflective, a space in which connection could be rebuilt, layer by layer. Daniel felt the gravity of their shared realization settle in his chest, a mixture of humility, hope, and responsibility. The path ahead was uncertain, but clarity had begun to emerge from the chaos. In the quiet, Daniel understood that reflection was not passive. It demanded confrontation with uncomfortable truths, a willingness to embrace vulnerability, and the courage to see both the beauty and the fragility of love. And in that understanding, he glimpsed the first real possibility of reconciliation, a way to navigate the chasm between desire and autonomy, intimacy and freedom, without losing sight of either. As the night deepened, they remained side by side, the rhythm of their breathing synchronized, a quiet testament to the work yet to come. Daniel realized that reflection and realization were not endpoints, but foundations, a preparation for the emotional labor required to rebuild trust, connection, and intimacy. And for the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to hope that love, tempered by honesty and understanding, could survive the fractures of distance and temptation.
The morning light spilled through the blinds, casting striped patterns across the apartment floor. Daniel awoke with a weight in his chest, not entirely unpleasant, a tangible sense that the quiet they had cultivated in recent days was about to be tested.
The choices they had made, the confessions shared, and the reflections undertaken had brought them closer in some ways, yet the reality of consequences now demanded attention. Olivia was already in the kitchen, her movements precise as she prepared breakfast. The aroma of coffee and toasted bread was comforting, a reminder that the mundane could exist alongside the extraordinary emotional turmoil they had navigated. Daniel observed her quietly, noting the subtle tension in her posture, the careful attention to her hands. Even in routine, she carried a consciousness shaped by their shared revelations. "Morning," he said softly, keeping his tone neutral but intentional. She glanced up, eyes meeting his, a small smile flickering across her face. "Morning. Sleep well?" "As well as I could," he replied, gesturing vaguely to the weight that had lingered overnight. "We have decisions to make today." Olivia nodded, placing a plate of scrambled eggs on the table. "We do, and they won't be easy. Choices are never simple when consequences are involved." Daniel set himself down across from her, the quiet between them thick with anticipation. He knew that their recent conversations had built a bridge, but now it was time to cross it, to step onto ground that required action rather than reflection. The past weeks of confessions, temptations, and reconciliations had all led to this moment of reckoning. "I've been thinking about what it means to be committed, to truly commit, not just in words, but in presence, trust, and understanding. And I realize that commitment is about choices. We choose each other every day, not because we have to, but because we want to, despite the difficulties." Olivia's eyes softened, though a glimmer of apprehension remained. "And sometimes choosing each other means facing hard truths. It means acknowledging mistakes, temptations, and desires that we might rather ignore. It means accepting that our actions have consequences, not just for ourselves, but for the other person." Daniel took a deep breath. "I know, and I also know that the way we respond to those consequences defines who we are, individually and as a couple. I can't undo what has happened, but I can choose how to move forward. And I want to choose us." Her gaze lingered on him, thoughtful and deliberate. Choosing us means accepting uncertainty. It means letting go of control, allowing the relationship to exist in its full complexity. It's not a guarantee of happiness, but it is a commitment to authenticity, honesty, and empathy. The weight of her words settled over him. The decisions before them were not about punishment or blame, they were about responsibility and growth. Daniel recognized that the previous weeks of reflection and confession had illuminated the contours of their vulnerabilities, but now tangible action was required. He had to decide whether he would continue to cling to fear and control or embrace trust and respect, even at the cost of discomfort. "I want to embrace that," he said finally. "I want to accept the uncertainty, to honor your autonomy, and to face the consequences of my own actions. We both have made mistakes, but we also have the opportunity to act with awareness, compassion, and integrity." Olivia reached across the table, her fingers brushing against his. The contact was small, but it carried a weight of intention. "Then we move forward together," she said, "not ignoring the past, but learning from it. Not escaping consequences, but taking responsibility for them. And perhaps in doing so, we can find a way to rebuild, stronger than before." The conversation shifted, moving from reflection to practicalities. They discussed boundaries, the ways in which they would navigate autonomy within togetherness, the importance of maintaining open channels of communication. Every choice they made carried implications, not just for their immediate comfort, but for the health of their shared life. They spoke of career demands, social engagements, and personal pursuits, seeking a balance that respected individuality while fostering intimacy. Daniel felt a subtle transformation within himself. The anxieties that had once driven his impulses, the need to chase, control, and predict, began to dissolve into a deliberate mindfulness.
He understood that love was not a static possession, but a dynamic interplay of choices and consequences. Every decision, every action could either nurture or erode the fragile trust between them. By afternoon, they decided to take a walk through Central Park, the autumn leaves rustling beneath their feet. The air was crisp, and the sunlight filtered through the branches in golden streaks. They walked side by side, not touching, but in a shared rhythm that felt both tentative and intimate. Conversations meandered from mundane observations to deeper admissions, each word a reinforcement of their commitment to engage honestly with one another. At a quiet bench overlooking the pond, Daniel paused. He turned to Olivia, meeting her gaze fully, unflinching. We have a choice, to either let fear dictate our actions or to take responsibility for our love. I choose responsibility. I choose understanding. I choose to face whatever consequences may come, as long as we face them together. Olivia nodded, a quiet resolve in her eyes. And I choose to meet you there, to navigate the uncertainties, the temptations, the moments of doubt with openness and honesty. It won't be easy, but it will be real. And real is what matters. As they continued walking, the city around them remained vibrant and indifferent, a reminder that life moves forward regardless of personal struggles. Yet, within their shared journey, Daniel sensed a subtle shift, a recognition that choices, when made consciously and together, could transform even the most fractured connections. By evening, back in the apartment, they sat together on the couch, the conversation winding down into comfortable silence. Daniel reflected on the gravity of the day's decisions. The confrontation had evolved into understanding, confession had evolved into reflection, and reflection had evolved into deliberate action. The consequences of the past weeks would not vanish, but they had been acknowledged, and the path forward was defined not by fear, but by conscious choice. In that quiet, Daniel realized that the essence of their journey was not about avoiding mistakes or pain. It was about how they responded, how they made choices in the face of uncertainty, and how they honored both their individuality and their shared life. Love, he understood now, was inseparable from responsibility, honesty, and courage. As the night settled over Manhattan, Daniel and Olivia sat together, aware of the fragility and potential of their relationship. The choices they had made, the confessions shared, and the reflections undertaken had laid the foundation for a renewed partnership. Consequences would follow, as they always do, but they would face them together, guided by understanding, empathy, and a shared commitment to navigate the complexities of love in its full, unvarnished reality. The city's skyline shimmered against the twilight, a mosaic of light and shadow that mirrored the journey Daniel and Olivia had endured. Their apartment, once heavy with tension and unspoken resentments, now carried a quiet warmth. The air between them was lighter, not because all troubles had vanished, but because acceptance had taken root, and with it, the possibility of renewal. Daniel sat at the small kitchen table, a cup of coffee cradled between his hands. The steam rose slowly, curling upward in lazy spirals, a gentle reminder that life moves forward in small, deliberate moments. Olivia entered, her presence calm yet vibrant, carrying a sense of purpose that was neither demanding nor restrained. She placed a hand on his shoulder, a touch that was both grounding and reassuring. "Morning," she said softly, the familiar sound now carrying a sense of shared understanding. "Morning," Daniel replied, his voice steady, imbued with a quiet confidence that had only recently begun to settle. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw not only the woman he loved, but also the complex, autonomous individual she had always been. The temptations, the confessions, the confrontations, all of it had led to this moment of clarity. They had spent the past weeks navigating emotional terrain that had once seemed insurmountable. Confessions had been made, reflections undertaken, and choices confronted. Now, the lessons of those moments crystallized into understanding. Love was not about possession, control, or certainty. It was about presence, honesty, and the courage to face both joy and discomfort together. Olivia poured herself a cup of coffee and sat across from him, their knees nearly touching under the table. We think we're finally starting to understand, not just about us, but about ourselves, about the kind of people we want to be, individually and together. I've realized that love isn't about controlling the other person's choices or chasing them when they pull away. It's about respect, trust, and embracing the unpredictability of life together. We can't erase mistakes or temptations, but we can learn from them and allow them to shape us in positive ways. Olivia reached across the table, her fingers lightly brushing his. And we've learned that honesty, even when uncomfortable, is what keeps us grounded. It's what allows us to rebuild, not on illusions, but on reality. And reality, messy and unpredictable as it is, can be beautiful if we approach it consciously. Their conversation drifted to plans for the future, not grandiose dreams or extravagant ambitions, but tangible, thoughtful steps that honored both their individuality and their shared life. They discussed schedules, personal projects, and social engagements with a new sense of collaboration rather than negotiation. The city outside, relentless and bustling, seemed to fade into a backdrop for their renewed partnership. Later that afternoon, they took a walk along the Hudson River, the crisp autumn air carrying the scent of fallen leaves in distant water. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. They walked side by side, occasionally brushing hands, sometimes pausing to admire the reflections on the river's surface. Each step felt deliberate, a conscious choice to engage with the present rather than dwell on the past.
Daniel reflected on the journey they had undertaken. The temptation he had felt, the jealousy and fear that had gnawed at him, had all been catalysts for growth. Olivia's autonomy and honesty had challenged him to confront his assumptions, insecurities, and expectations. In facing these emotional crucibles together, they had discovered resilience, empathy, and the strength to redefine their relationship. Olivia spoke quietly, breaking a comfortable silence. I think acceptance is the key. Accepting each other's flaws, our choices, the consequences of our actions. Only then can we move forward without fear or resentment. Daniel nodded, feeling the truth of her words resonate deeply. Acceptance, he said softly, is not resignation. It's understanding. It's choosing to honor each other's experiences and emotions, even when they challenge us. And in that choice, we find freedom. Freedom to love fully, without pretense or expectation. As evening fell, they returned to their apartment, the city lights flickering through the windows like distant constellations. They shared a quiet dinner, laughter mingling with reflection, the ordinary act of eating together imbued with new significance. Every glance, every word, every gesture carried the weight of their journey, a testament to the resilience of their bond. Afterward, they moved to the couch, sitting close but not crowded, letting the silence envelop them with comfort rather than tension. Daniel watched Olivia's profile in the soft glow of the lamp and felt a profound gratitude for the journey, the confessions, confrontations, reflections, and choices that had brought them to this place. He understood that love was not a static destination, but an ongoing process, one that required courage, honesty, and conscious engagement every day. Olivia turned to him, her eyes reflecting both serenity and determination. "We're not perfect," she said, "and we will face challenges, temptations, and uncertainties again. But we have the tools now: trust, honesty, empathy, and understanding. That's enough to build something real." Daniel took her hand in his, squeezing gently. "Yes, real. Fragile perhaps, but real. And I want to protect it,
nurture it, and grow with you. They sat together as the night deepened, the city humming softly below. In the quiet, they allowed themselves to feel fully the pain of the past weeks, the relief of confession, the clarity of reflection, and the subtle hope of new beginnings. Each emotion, acknowledged and embraced, became a thread in the fabric of their renewed partnership. Daniel realized that acceptance was not the end of their journey, but the foundation for everything to come. It was the recognition that love is not ownership, and that happiness is not the absence of struggle, but the presence of understanding. With this acceptance, they could face the future unafraid, prepared to navigate the complexities of life and love together. As the night settled around them, they held hands, a silent promise passing between them. The message that once created distance now served as a catalyst for growth, the confessions as a bridge to understanding, and the reflections as a foundation for resilience. The consequences of past actions were no longer chains, but lessons, guiding them toward a shared life imbued with honesty, empathy, and choice. In that moment, Daniel and Olivia understood the profound truth of their journey, that love, when coupled with acceptance and courage, could evolve into something enduring, profound, and liberating. And as they drifted toward sleep, side by side, they embraced not only each other, but the new beginnings their choices had made possible.